My name is Nora Whitlock. I'm 34 years old. On June 21, 2024, at 8:51 in the evening, I was sitting at the far end of a 22-foot table in the Harborview Room in Traverse City, Michigan, holding a black leather folder with a bill inside it for $7,142.60. 42 people were watching me. 3 tiers of lobster shells sat in the middle of the table like something excavated. My mother, Denise Whitlock, 63 years old, was standing at the head of that table with a glass of champagne she hadn't paid for, and she tapped the side of it with her ring until the room went quiet. "Nora's got it," she said. "She always does." Then she smiled at the room the way she smiled at church people and said the line I will hear in my sleep until the day I die. "Sweetheart, you don't have a family. You have a balance owed." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't stand up or shove the folder back down the table or tell 42 people what my mother had done to me in the 11 months prior. I reached down to my plate, picked up the little blue rubber band that had been cut off a lobster claw, and slid it into the pocket of my jacket. Then I said, "Okay." What they didn't know was that the credit card the restaurant had on file for that room had been frozen since 4:15 that afternoon. What they didn't know was that the woman sitting quietly at table 3 in the navy blazer wasn't my date. And what my mother truly did not know, could not have imagined, was that every dollar she had lived on for the past 3 years had come out of an account with my signature on it. She thought she was handing me a bill. She was handing me a microphone. Before I tell you what happened when my mother's card declined in front of her entire congregation, please take a second to like and subscribe. Drop your city and local time in the comments below. I love knowing where in the world you're listening from right now. I grew up 18 miles outside Traverse City, in a yellow ranch house on Birch Hill Road with a gravel driveway that ate bicycle tires. My father, Gary, ran a septic pumping business and said maybe 40 words a day, most of them about weather. My mother kept the books at Redeemer Baptist and told everyone she was in administration. There were 3 of us. Trent, 4 years older, and Amber, 5 years younger, and me in the middle, which in our house was not a position but a job description. I learned the family's arithmetic early. When Trent was 15, he broke his wrist in a hockey game and my mother drove him to Grand Rapids to see a specialist. When I was 11 and got strep throat twice in one winter, she gave me the leftover amoxicillin from Amber's ear infection and told me to gargle salt. At 11, I also started doing her ledgers. That part sounds strange until you understand my mother. She hated math. She had a shoebox of church offering envelopes and a green columnar pad and no patience, and she discovered that I was fast and neat and that I liked the way numbers behaved. So on Sunday afternoons I sat at the kitchen table with a pencil and totaled the loose plate offering while she watched Lifetime movies in the next room. "Read it back," she'd call. $218.14. "Good girl. That's what you're for. That's what you're for." I want you to hold on to that sentence, because it came back 30 years later in a room full of lobster shells, wearing better clothes. The one person in that family who saw me was my grandmother, Ruth Kowalczyk. My mother's mother. She lived in Elk Rapids in a house that smelled like Comet cleanser and coffee grounds, with a linoleum floor-worn pail in a path between the sink and the stove. She'd spent 29 years running the cafeteria at Elk Rapids Elementary and 4 summers before that working the boil line at a fish house in Rockland, Maine, when she was young enough to be reckless about it. Ruth was the reason lobster meant anything in our family at all. Once a year, the last Sunday in August, she'd drive to the fish market in Sutton's Bay and come back with a cooler. She did it the Maine way, a pot of water, salt, no fuss, newspaper spread over the table, a bowl of melted butter with a curl of lemon in it. She taught me how to twist the tail off, how to crack a claw with the flat of a knife instead of a nutcracker, how to get the meat out of the knuckles, which is where the good stuff hides and where nobody with any patience shortage ever bothers to look. "Knuckles are for people who don't quit," she said. "That's you." She was 71 then and I was 9 and I thought that was just a thing about lobsters. She also told me the thing I built a life on. I was 16, sitting on her back step with a plate on my knees, and I just told her that my mother had taken my paycheck from the ice cream stand to cover the electric bill. Ruth didn't get angry. She never got loud. Money's just a record of what people think you're worth, she said. So keep your own books, Nora. Don't let somebody else keep them for you. That was August. My birthday was in October, and that October is the reason I'm making this video. October 9th, 2006. My 17th birthday. Ruth wanted to do a late-season lobster dinner for me. She'd found them on sale, 4 of them, $48 total, which for her was a genuine extravagance. My mother took over the planning within a day, the way she always did. She invited 9 people. 4 lobsters became 4 lobsters and a lot of side dishes, and when we sat down, my mother put a plate in front of me with 2 hot dogs on it, split and grilled, the way you'd feed a kid at a birthday party in 1994. Trent's got a game tomorrow, he needs the protein, she said. Amber won't eat anything else. And Pastor Dale's here, we can't very well give the pastor a hot dog. I said okay. I was 17 and I said okay. Then after the cake, in the kitchen, with the water running so nobody would hear, she asked me for $82. For the sides. For the wine. She said it wasn't fair for Grandma to carry the whole thing. I had $140 in a sock in my dresser drawer from 6 weeks of scooping ice cream. Mom, it's my birthday. She looked at me with real confusion, and this is the part one need you to understand, it wasn't cruelty she was performing. It was a fact she was reporting. Nora, you were always the one who paid, she said. Amber gets celebrated. You settle up. That's just how you girls came out. I gave her the $82. I went out to the back step. Ruth came out 10 minutes later with a plate in her hand, 1 whole lobster, cracked, the knuckle meat already picked out and piled on top, a paper cup of butter beside it. She'd hidden it in the oven that wasn't working. She sat down next to me and didn't say a word for a long time. Then she said, write down that number. What number? $82. Write it down with the date. Someday somebody's going to tell you it never happened. I wrote it down. I was 17 and I thought she was being dramatic. I want to tell you about the family math, because every family like mine has it and it's never about money, not really. Money is just the language it's written in. Trent was the investment. When he was 19 my parents refinanced the house to pay for a hockey year in Ontario that went nowhere. When he was 28, my mother co-signed $86,000 for a landscaping business, Whitlock & Sons, which had no sons in it, only Trent and a used skid steer. Amber was the ornament. Dance, then pageants, then cosmetology school in Grand Rapids, then a wedding that got planned 4 separate times to 3 different men. And I was the ledger. I left at 18 with 2 duffel bags and a scholarship to Central Michigan. I paid my own way through the CPA exam, sitting for all 4 sections in 9 months, while working nights at a call center in Mount Pleasant. In 2016 I got hired at Ostrander and Reyes in Traverse City doing forensic accounting, which is a fancy way of saying I get paid to find out who's stealing. In 2019 I bought a 2-bedroom condo at 818 Cherry Bend Road with a down payment I'd saved in nickels and overtime. Nobody in my family came to see it. My mother asked what it cost and then told the church that I'd done well for myself, but you know, she doesn't call. Grandma Ruth died on December 14, 2019, at 6:32 in the morning at Munson Medical Center, holding my hand, 4 days before her 91st birthday. And this is where the story really starts, because Ruth Kowalczyk, retired school cafeteria manager, widow of a Michigan Road Commission foreman, left an estate worth $1,400,000. Nobody expected it. Nobody knew. She bought 200 acres of scrubland near Belair in 1974 for $11,000, and in 2004 a developer bought 140 of those acres for $810,000, and she put every cent of it into index funds and never told a living soul, and kept clipping coupons for Comet Cleanser until the week she died. The estate went into a trust. The original trustee was her brother, my great-uncle Raymond Kowalczyk, 68, a retired surveyor in Cadillac. The beneficiaries were her 3 grandchildren and her daughter, with distributions, at the trustee's discretion, for health, education, and genuine need. Ray lasted 14 months. On March 3, 2021, at a Big Boy off US 131, he slid a manila envelope across the table to me and said, "I'm out. I'm too old for this, and your mother calls me 9 times a day. Ruth named you successor. She wanted it this way. She just wanted me to take the first year of screaming." I opened the envelope. There was the trust instrument, and there was a letter in Ruth's handwriting, dated November 2, 2019, 6 weeks before she died. I still have it. I'm going to read you 3 lines. "Nora. You are the only one of them who ever asked me how I was. I am giving you the keys because you are the only one who can hold them without spending them. Denise will tell you it is her money. It is not her money. It is mine, and I am giving it to you to hand out carefully, the way I handed out lunches to children whose parents forgot to send money, quietly, so no one has to feel small." And then the last line, which I didn't understand until 3 years later. "If any of them ever takes from you something you did not offer, you stop. You will know when. Stop, and don't apologize." So I became the trustee, and I did exactly what she asked, and I did it quietly, and that was my mistake. Between April 2021 and June 2024, I approved $191,000 in distributions. I paid off $63,500 on my mother's home equity line. I paid Trent's business loan down by $40,000 and covered 11 months of his equipment payments. I paid Amber's cosmetology license, her car repair, and her security deposit in Kalkaska. I paid 2 of Emma's, that's Trent's daughter, my niece, she was 8 then, I paid 2 of her dental procedures. And I never told them it was me. Ruth said quietly, so no one has to feel small. So every payment went out under the letterhead of Raghunathan and Boyle, the trust's law firm, and every one of them thought money simply came out of a machine called the estate, on a schedule, forever, because Grandma had loved them. My mother told people at Redeemer Baptist that her mother had provided for the family. She meant herself. She bought a Buick Enclave. She put in a 3-season room. She also, on September 12, 2022, walked into a bank in Kalkaska with my social security number, my old Birch Hill Road address, and a photo of my driver's license she'd taken at Thanksgiving while I was doing dishes, and opened a credit card in my name. I found out on May 30, 2024, at 10:47 in the morning, because I run a credit freeze and a monitoring alert on myself, the way I tell every client to, and an alert came through on a Chase account I had never opened. $21,840 in charges. I sat in my car in the parking lot at Ostrander and Reyes for 40 minutes. I didn't cry. I opened my laptop and pulled the statements and I read 20 months of my mother's life in merchant codes. A cruise deposit. Nordstrom in Grand Rapids. $2,200 at a med spa. $416, on my birthday, at a steakhouse in Petoskey. I'm a forensic accountant. Finding out who's stealing is the entire content of my working life. And I sat in a Honda in a parking lot and read my mother's handwriting in a spreadsheet. Here's what I want you to know about me. I did not call her. I did not drive to Birch Hill Road. I did not post anything, tell anyone, or write a single furious text. I opened a new folder and I named it Ruth. If you've ever been the one everyone in your family calls when the bill comes due, the one who never gets celebrated, only totaled, type Ruth in the comments. I want to know we're not alone in this. Over the next 3 weeks I did what I do for clients. I pulled every statement. I ordered a certified copy of the application, and the application had a phone number on it that was my mother's cell, and a mother's maiden name answer that was Kowalczyk, and an email address, dwhitlock1961@gmail.com, that she'd been using since 2009. On June 6, I filed an identity theft report with the FTC. On June 11 I sat in an interview room at the Kalkaska County Sheriff's Office with Detective Dale Pruitt, 46, 11 years in financial crimes, and gave him a spiral-bound packet with tabs. He turned it over twice and said, "Ma'am, I usually have to build this myself." On June 14, my mother called me for the first time in 5 months. Amber's engagement dinner is the 21st. The Harbor View Room. Ethan's family is very nice people, so please dress up. Who's hosting? It's a family thing, Nora. Don't be like that. Then, before she hung up, she said the second sentence I'll never forget, and she said it lightly, like a joke, because that's how it always came. You're not in the wedding, honey. You're in the budget. Actually, that was Amber. My mother handed her the phone and Amber said it. 29 years old, and she said it laughing, and I could hear my mother laughing behind her. I said, see you on the 21st. Here's what they didn't know about the Harborview room. In 2022, I did an 11-week forensic engagement for a man named Marcus Vandenberg, 61, who has owned the Harborview since 1996. His general manager of 9 years had taken $264,000 through voided comps and a ghost vendor. I found it. I sat with Marcus in his office at 9:13 on a Tuesday night and showed him, and he put his face in his hands, and then he shook my hand and said, anything. Ever. I mean it. I had never once called it in. On June 18th I called it in. Not to punish anybody. I called Marcus because a private room at the Harborview requires a card on file to hold it, and I wanted to know whose name was on that hold. It was mine. The Chase card. Ending in 4471. She'd used the stolen card to reserve the room where she was going to tell 42 people I was paying. Marcus went very quiet on the phone. Then he said, what do you want me to do? I said, nothing. Take the reservation. Don't change a thing. Just seat me at the far end. The card was declared stolen and frozen by the issuer at 4:15 p.m. on June 21st, per the fraud claim I'd filed 16 days earlier. I didn't have to do a thing. The clock did it. The other call I made was to Priya Raghunathan, 47, the attorney who'd administered Ruth's trust since 2020, and who had never met my family because she had only ever met me. She came as my +1. June 21st, 2024. 7 o'clock. The Harborview room has a wall of windows over West Grand Traverse Bay, and that night the water was the color of a nickel and the sun stayed up until almost 10, the way it does up here in June. There were 42 people. Ethan Deschamps's family, 12 of them, including his mother Carol, 58, a middle school principal in Petoskey, who shook my hand and said, you're Nora. Amber says you're the smart one. 9 people from Redeemer Baptist. Cousin Beth Kowalczyk, 39, an ICU nurse at Munson. Uncle Ray, 71 now, in a sport coat from another decade. My father Gary, 68, in the corner, with a beer, saying nothing. And my mother, in cream, working the room like a bride. I sat at the far end and ordered a bowl of chowder. At 7:48 the towers started coming out. Chilled lobster towers, $95 each, and my mother ordered 6 of them and then 4 more. Lobster rolls for the table. 2 lobster mac and cheeses. 4 bottles of Shasanya Mantracha at $310 a bottle, and my mother pronounced it wrong twice and loudly. Trent, 38, leaned back with a claw in his fist and shouted down the table at me, you not eating moneybags? I said, I had a big lunch. Amber gave a toast about how her grandmother would have loved this, how Grandma Ruth always did lobster in August, how the family had been so blessed. My mother touched her chest. 9 people from Redeemer Baptist said amen to lobster. The bill came at 8:51. A server set the black folder down in front of my mother, and my mother stood up and tapped her glass, and she looked down the whole length of that table at me and said, Nora's got it. She always does. Then, sweetheart, you don't have a family. You have a balance owed. Somebody laughed. Not everybody. Carol Deschamps did not laugh. The folder came down the table hand to hand, 22 feet, like a collection plate. I opened it. $7,142.60. I said, okay. I took the blue rubber claw band off my plate and put it in my pocket. Then I stood up, and I walked the folder back up the table, and I set it down in front of my mother, and I stayed standing beside her, and I spoke at a normal volume, the volume you'd use to read a number back to somebody in the next room. The card on the reservation is a Chase Visa ending in 4471. It was opened on September 12th, 2022, at a bank in Kalkaska, using my social security number and a photograph of my driver's license. I did not open it. It was reported stolen on May 30th. It was frozen at 4:15 this afternoon. There is no card on this room, Mom. There never was. The room did not gasp. That's a thing movies get wrong. The room just got very quiet, the way a room gets when everyone is doing arithmetic at once. My mother laughed. Nora, my God, in front of people. $21,840, I said. The cruise deposit. The med spa. $416 at Rose in Petoskey on October 9th, on my birthday, which I spent at home. Marcus Vandenberg came through the service door then, in his gray suit, with 2 staff behind him. He didn't raise his voice either. Mrs. Whitlock, there's no valid payment on this room. I'll need a card, or we'll need to make other arrangements. Trent handed over his card. Declined. He handed over a second one. Declined. My mother's Discover card declined. And she turned to me, and her face did the thing I had waited 34 years to see. The public face came off. Underneath it wasn't a monster. It was something smaller and much worse, a woman who had genuinely never once considered that the machine could stop. You're the trustee, she said. Since March 3, 2021. She stopped. She looked around the table. The estate pays for. There's no such thing as the estate, I said. There's Grandma's trust, and there's me. I paid $63,500 on your equity line. I paid $40,000 on Trent's loan and 11 months of his equipment. I paid Amber's license and her deposit. Emma's dental work. $191,000 in 3 years, and every one of you thought it came out of a wall. Priya Raghunathan stood up at table 3 with a leather portfolio and said, Ms. Whitlock, Mr. Whitlock, Ms. Whitlock, I represent the Ruth E. Kowalczyk Trust. The trustee suspended all discretionary distributions at 10:47 this morning. You'll each receive formal notice by mail. I'm happy to answer questions at my office, not here. Then it happened the way it does, one at a time, and quietly, which is so much worse than shouting. Uncle Ray stood up. 71 years old, hands on the back of his chair. I resigned as trustee because of you, Denise. I saw what you were asking for. I told Ruth in 2019 and she said, I know, Raymond. That's why it's going to Nora. Cousin Beth stood up. You asked me to co-sign a $5,000 loan in March. You told me Nora had cut the family off. She hadn't. She'd just paid Emma's dentist. A man named Pastor Dale Farrick, 64, who had eaten a hot dog at my 17th birthday party, stood up and said, Denise, is any of this in the church's books? And my mother looked at him and didn't answer, and that not answering went around that room like a current. Carol Deschamps put her napkin on the table, walked the length of the room, and took Amber by the elbow. She said one sentence, and she said it kindly, which somehow made it land harder, honey, come sit with us. And Amber, 29, in her engagement dress, who 11 days earlier had told me I wasn't in the wedding, I was in the budget, started crying and said, I didn't know, Nora. I swear to God, I didn't know. I believe she didn't. Not knowing is its own kind of participation, but I believe her. My mother's mask came all the way off then. She swept the folder off the table and it hit the wall and the check fluttered out of it, and she said, in front of 42 people including 9 members of her congregation, you ungrateful little leech. You were the one who paid. That's all you were ever good for. Nobody moved. And I want to be clear about what I did next, because this is the part people ask me about. I didn't answer her. I didn't cry. I didn't say one more word to my mother that night. I picked the check up off the floor, handed it to Marcus, and said, I'll cover the food for Ethan's family and the Deschamps party. Not the rest. It was $1,104. I paid it with my own debit card, from my own money, for the guests who hadn't done anything to me. Marcus's staff walked my mother out through the main dining room, which is the long way, past every table, and she was still talking the whole way. My father Gary finished his beer, put it down, and followed her without looking at anyone. Detective Pruitt didn't arrest her at the restaurant. That's television. He interviewed her on June 27th. Here's what happened after. On November 14, 2024, my mother pled to identity theft under Michigan law, a felony. She got probation, 90 days deferred, and restitution of $21,840 at $300 a month, which will take her 6 years. Redeemer Baptist removed her from the church office in July, after an internal review turned up a separate $9,000 nobody has fully explained. She and my father sold the house on Birch Hill Road in February 2025 to pay off the equity line I was no longer paying, and they rent a 2-bedroom in Kalkaska now. Whitlock & Sons closed in October 2024. Trent works for a paving crew out of Gaylord. He sent me one text, in December, "Hope you're happy." No apostrophe. I'm not, particularly. Happy isn't the word. Here's the word. I live at 818 Cherry Bend Road, and as of April 2025 I own it outright. I'm a partner track senior manager at Ostrander and Reyes. I have $196,000 in savings and a will and a trust of my own and no unexplained charges on anything, ever. I go to Marcus's staff Christmas party every year, and last year he stood up and told the story of the 11 weeks in 2022, and the line cooks applauded, and I turned red. Amber married Ethan in September 2025. Small wedding, 40 people, at a bar near Belair, and she paid for it herself with money from the salon she works at. She wrote me a 4-page letter first. I read it twice. I went to the wedding. I sat with Carol Deschamps. I have not spoken to my mother since June 21, 2024, and I don't intend to, and I want to say clearly for anyone waiting for the part where I forgive her, that part isn't coming. Peace and reconciliation are not the same product. Anne Emma Whitlock, now 11 years old, Trent's daughter, who did nothing to anyone. In August 2024, an envelope came to my office with a drawing in it, a lobster, red, with a blue band on one claw, and above it in pencil, "Thank you for my teeth." There's a $529 account with her name on it. It has $31,000 in it. She doesn't know, and she won't until she's 18, and that is on purpose. Quietly, so no one has to feel small. Grandma Ruth wrote the instructions and I'm just following them. I've thought a lot about what my mother actually said that night, because she was right about one thing and wrong about the thing underneath it. She said I had a balance owed. She was right, there was a ledger between us. She just never once considered which column she was in. Love in my family was always presented as an account you could overdraw forever, as long as one person in the house had been assigned to make it balance. And I want to say this to anyone who's been assigned that job, you are allowed to close the account. You are not the machine in the wall. Loyalty is not a subscription. And the fact that you're good at carrying it is the worst possible reason to keep carrying it. Ruth knew. That's why she gave the keys to the one grandchild who could hold them without spending them, and why the last line of her letter wasn't advice, it was permission. If any of them ever takes from you something you did not offer, you stop. You will know when. Stop, and don't apologize. I keep the blue rubber band in a small glass jar on the windowsill above my kitchen sink. It's the one thing I took out of that room, and it cost me nothing, and it's worth more to me than the $1.4 million I administer and will never touch. Every August, on the last Sunday, I do a pot of water and salt, no fuss, newspaper on the table, butter with a curl of lemon in it. I invite Beth and Ray and Marcus and, since last year, Amber and Ethan. I crack the claws with the flat of a knife. I always pick the knuckles first and put them on somebody else's plate, because knuckles are for people who don't quit. Last August, after everyone left, I stood at the sink at 11:40 at night with the water running, and I looked at that little blue band in its jar, and I said it out loud, to nobody, in my own paid-for kitchen. I paid for exactly what I ordered. Not 1 cent more. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the one handed the bill for a meal you weren't allowed to eat, share this video. Someone in your life might need to hear it. Subscribe if you want more stories like this.